Hello. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk with George Guy, where we talk to leaders across the country and talk to them about what they're doing in their communities to transform their communities. We call them servant leaders. And they'll be working from different types of backgrounds and talk about the efforts and their background and history and what inspires them. And hopefully, they'll inspire you as we get to know some of the folks across the country that are doing a lot of good work. So, today we're going to be talking to a good friend of mine. His name is Sean Gilbert. So Sean, how you doing today?
Good, George. How about yourself?
Not too bad, man. Just seen you last week uh, in
Be
DC.
be
Yeah,
seeing you next week.
that's right. So we see a lot of each other. So no, Sean, thank you for being a guest on actually our second guest of the relaunch of this show. So I really wanted you to. I had you in mind as we relaunched, so I'm glad that we were able to get you on early. I know your schedule is going to be hectic here, so I really wanted folks to get to know who you are as a leader and the work that you've done in the communities you serve, because you've been in a few different communities and you're in a few different communities now as well. That's why I think it's important for people to understand who you are and the work that you've done and how you view the work that you do and the communities you serve. So, with that being said, one of the things I tell Sean is when I heard his story, he has a very compelling story when he talks about his background. We have a lot of similarities in terms of our upbringing and background and community. So, Sean, if you could please give folks a little bit of idea of who you are and really how that informs the work that you do today.
Sure. Um, I am the executive director of this month. We're the Morristown Housing Authority. We are in a rebrand, and come 1st of May, we'll be Tennessee Valley Housing Services. We operate in 5 counties and 3 cities, so it was a little bit of a misnomer just to be the Morristown Housing Authority. So we're rebranding to Tennessee Valley Housing Services because that reflects the community that we're in now across all the communities, but it also reflects that we're not just a housing authority. We don't want to be looked at as just, we want people to realize we provide services, we provide community, we provide the things that our customers need. So we always want to be more encompassing than what we have been in the past, and we're always looking towards the future. Um, George knows my story, but I grew up in southern West Virginia. When you walked out my front door, you saw Kentucky. So I was on the southern West Virginia Kentucky line in a town that was, you either worked for the railroad, you worked for the coal mines, or you probably slipped into drug and alcohol dependence and just had issues. Everything in the city was a company town that was owned by the coal mines and the railroads in Pittsburgh, Chicago, wherever it may be. It was a town of have-nots, but it was also a town of great faith and community. None of us had anything and we didn't know it, so I wouldn't change that growing up for anything. Um, I would look out the door and to see my father worked the swing shift, which meant if you didn't work in that area, he worked for the railroad. Sometimes he worked first shift, which was 7 in the morning to 3 or so in the evening, or he worked second shift, or he worked third shift, which led to really, really good moods by not knowing when you were working. So usually he'd work 2 weeks one, 2 weeks one, 2 weeks one. So we were all having to be cognizant of dad's shift. But seeing people that worked that way, that went out every day, taught you a work ethic that, you had to work hard. You had to, if you wanted to have anything, and none of us really had anything. So my grandmother lived straight up the road. My grandfather was a conductor for the railroad for um, 40 or 50 years. My dad worked on the railroad for over 40 years. And everyone else, if you didn't work for the railroad, you worked in the mines. And those people led short, hard lives, whether it meant dying in the mines, dying from black lung, working long, long hours. But the great thing about the community, besides that, I mean, that doesn't sound that great, does it? But was it was a town of migrants. We had a large population of people from the Middle East. We had a large African American population. We had a large population of varied backgrounds, whether it was in religions as well. So when you think of Southern West Virginia, you don't really think of a melting pot, but this was truly a melting pot. And I was able to be exposed to, the Catholic background, the Jewish background, and get appreciation for everything that was involved there. I didn't live in what was public housing at the time, but most of my friends did, because that's where we played ball at. So we didn't know at the time that I was going to be in affordable housing, but I was certainly exposed to it. And it was such a formation to see all these people. I lived a lot of time in my grandmother's house, and my grandmother had a large impact on me. So I would see the way she worked at the YMCA for years and years. There was a large YMCA. She worked there. My mother worked in the local grocery store, getting up at going in and baking at 6 a.m. to make ends meet. So, I would just see all these people that made it and found a way to make it. And I felt it was my duty to follow on. I'm the first person out of my direct family to actually go to graduate from college. I did have an uncle that also graduated. So, it was just an area, but I was so blessed that there were so many people in my graduating high school class that became doctors, that became lawyers, that became more than what this little town usually put out. So it was just a blessing to grow up in an area that was a hard place to grow up, that you had to fight for everything. But you would see the way the community came together. And that's what I based, you'd see neighbor helping neighbor. You'd see our neighbors, whatever it was, people were losing jobs all the time. If you got crossways with the railroad or the coal mines, you were out of a job. And, people would band together, whether it was through the churches or just as neighbors, to make sure that you had food on your plate. So that's what I've always based my thought. And, what am I going to do to help someone else have a roof over their head and food on their plate? And I think if everyone across the country did that, we would really have everything taken care of.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharing that story. Folks don't know about West Virginia. When people think about West Virginia, they think about good football program, college football program, myself, Randy Moss. And I tell you, when I saw the story of Randy Moss, that's what really, I was like, to be honest, you think that West Virginia is primarily working whites, is think of when you think of and that's it. And what I saw in that, and what I've learned is there's a lot more diversity in that community. But the one thing that's consistent is working class families, the railroad, the coal mine, and that type of thing. And so so you talked about your grandmother working at was it the YWCA?
YMCA.
YMCA. And your father, does your father work on the railroad or the coal mine?
My father, my side of the family was all railroad. My dad worked 42 years on the railroad. My uncle worked 40-some years on the railroad. So my grandfather worked 40 or 50 years on the railroad. So, it's sort of segmented. You see how things sort of roll over. So our family is a railroad family. My dad went to work for the railroad 10 days after he graduated high school, and he never had another job besides working for the railroad. So, the railroad has done fantastic things for our family. I never want to say anything bad about the railroad, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. So I'm appreciative of that, but I also know how hard they rely on their labor. So, and I think it's important to stand up for, people that have been sort of used and abused.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I come from a similar community where manufacturing is big, John Deere. And so a lot of the folks that were ahead of me, grandfather's age, and as well as my father and my mother's generation, a lot of them work in the foundry of John Deere. And so I can appreciate working class families and individuals that are really trying to make it day to day, put away something, buy a home for your family, put them through school, and that type of thing. So, I, so let's talk about how now. Then you said, hey, I'm going to go to college. So they did what they did, invested in you, go to college, and then you get into housing. Talk to us about that in
Okay.
terms of your work in housing, some of the things you've done. You got over 25 years in housing. Talk to us about how all that worked in terms of how your career.
Sure. I've never met anyone that went away to school and said, "I'm going to work in affordable housing." So I can't say that that was my aspiration at the time when I was growing up. I wanted to be a football coach. My dad said, "I'm paying too much money for you to major in PE," and we had some frank conversations, and so he was probably right. But
There's
you know,
nothing wrong with football coaches, by the way. Let's just put that out there, right?
I agree. I agree.
But your dad said, "Hey, you're not going to do that, so you're going to do something else."
You're
So,
going to do something else. So I was actually, I was in engineering, and I couldn't do imaginary numbers. So I switched out of that, and I started thinking, what do I want to do? And I took a class called Catastrophic Failures, and it was about bridge collapses or things of that nature and why they happen and what they happen. So it made me a little bit fascinated with, you know, urban planning and the design flaws. So I sort of ventured over that, and I graduated from Virginia Tech with a degree in urban planning. And even coming out after that, you weren't really sure, where you're going to end up. So I worked in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and West Virginia in city government, basically working with CDBG programs, with people that needed help. As far as when I worked in Altoona, Pennsylvania, we had a mini city hall set up, and I was the new guy there, but I was called the mini mayor of a low income community. So we worked to get people to paint their housing. We worked to get people seats for their kids, safety seats for their cars, car seats. Just whatever was needed in the community to promote the growth of the community, both on an individual level, but also it was a disinvested community that we wanted people to take pride in. So we painted over 100 houses that year. So we had the fire department coming in doing safety, installing smoke detectors. We wanted to have people have a place that they could live to be proud. So I left there and worked in West Virginia for a while in downtown development, but I actually took a job in Kentucky as a housing authority executive director at 28 years old. I went in, the youngest employee there, didn't know what Section 8 was, to be honest with you, but I got the job, didn't know anyone when I got there. And once you get affordable housing in your blood, it does not leave. I was able to get in there and start making an impact on people's lives. We expanded our housing programs into rural development and into the tax credit world, and started growing the affordable housing in this small town in Kentucky, which wasn't far from where I grew up, in Hatfield-McCoy country, if you know the Hatfield-McCoys.
absolutely.
So my first tax credit deal was right next to the site of the last hanging in the Hatfield-McCoy feud. So there's a lot of history there that people don't know about, but it's also the same coal mining community that I grew up in, the same railroad community I grew up in. So we started developing, we started seeing that, or I did, that housing is economic development. Affordable housing is community development. And when we can drive that stimulus of bringing the affordable housing to the jobs and bring the people to the jobs, the community will flourish. So we started developing, and we started having, we could see it. We saw that when we put in new housing, that the rent rolls went up because people went to work. We started seeing that, health outcomes were better because people were working and they could afford health care. They had insurance now. We started seeing that their kids made better grades. So the communities were impacted and improved because it started with the roof over the head. So a friend of mine I'll give him a shout out. He's the voice of the Furman Paladins, and which they just had a big win. So we were talking one day, and he said, we were talking about affordable housing. He said he had a friend of his recently tell him that Jackie Robinson said, in the context of the African American community, he was asked, is education the number one factor in making sure that community thrives? He goes, no, that starts at home and housing. So, and I truly agree with that. You got to have a roof over your head and a stable environment, or you're not going to have the sleep as a kid to have the education. If the parents aren't employed in providing food for our kids, food insecurity can affect the growth and the educational capabilities. So housing to me is the number one factor in economic and community development. And I love the fact that you're in this field. You're not only helping people, but you're helping the community. So I truly look back and say, 10 years from now, we want to make sure that all of our third grade kids are meeting their reading level, because 10 years from now, I want them in homes and in jobs and not prison cells.
Absolutely. And education, as you just eloquently put it, education is the gateway out of poverty, after you have a stable home. So Sean, a lot of people are curious about rural communities, and they say, man, they don't see how folks can transform these rural communities that have been hit hard because of plant closures. Coal mining is not as much as you used to be. Railroads are not as active as they were. How were you able to transform these communities? Because I see here all the different things that you've done, the products that you've used in the low income housing tax credit realm to make sure that development is done. So talk a little bit about that in terms of transforming these rural communities and thinking differently.
Sure. The first thing the rural community has to do is educate themselves on what programs are out there. So, and we did that in Kentucky when I first started down this realm. And then we did it in Knoxville, which is not a rural community at all. But it was where I was able to more hone my craft. Now, here in Morristown and the surrounding area, we're a bedroom community to a degree of Knoxville. We're in the Smoky Mountains, so we near Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge. So, but we're also one of the top 20 manufacturing areas in the country. So we have a lot of manufacturing going on around us. So we have, you got to go and you got to talk to your state finance agencies and talk to HUD and find out what programs, every state's different, what programs are out there. So we started identifying those programs as early as we could. I'm a big proponent of the RAD program. We're transitioning all of our portfolio through that program to make sure that, housing as it was is not a stable format. It never will be. So we got to get to a point where we control our own destinies. So we're working with the localities that we're in to make sure, what do you need? I don't know how many times I've gotten called from a local manufacturer. We need workers. Where are the workers? We go downtown Knoxville and you walk into a restaurant and you see the place is half empty, but you have a 2-hour wait. It's because the workers are not close enough to work. So we're having continuous conversations with, let's put the housing where the jobs are. And that's what we did at Knoxville. That's what we're hoping to do here in Morristown and the surrounding communities. So we're working with the tax credit program right now. We have an application in to build complexes, but also, you want people in your own community. So we're repositioning our whole portfolio through the RAD program so that we can make investments in our properties. Whether it's utilizing FHA loans, which we are going to do, or we're utilizing capital funds that we're switching over, or community investment tax credits or affordable housing trust fund. Our plan is to expand our footprint and also to make sure that 3 or 4 years from now, our current housing that has a $25 to $30 million capital backlog, that we address that, and that all these units that we have all these homes that we have are reflective of the community. When you drive through, we don't want you saying that's public housing. We want you saying that is community housing. It may be affordable, but it looks like what the community as a whole. Our biggest complex directly across the street from our high school, one of our 2 high schools. Our kids walk across the street to go to school. They have a beautiful school complex over there. We want them to have a beautiful home that they feel safe and comfortable in, and that their parents are comfortable in leaving them in to go to work. So it's not, it's economic stimulus, but it's community building. We're putting major resources into our learning centers now. We're part of a group called Ready by 6 that operates out of our learning centers, and their whole goal is to make sure families are ready and positioned when their children turn 6. It's not just the kids that are educationally ready, it's the families that are educated, that they know how to take care of their kids, they know how to take care of their homes, they know how to take care of spending and budgeting properly. But we're trying to turn away from just credit counseling, because it doesn't do us any good to tell people, it's going to affect your credit score if you can't pay your bills when you're making $750 and have $1,000 in bills. So we got so we're working with the manufacturers and everyone to say, let's get these people in jobs, and then we can teach and educate people on how to spend the money and how to position themselves for 2, 3, 5 years in now. If you're worried about where you're going to eat tonight, how are you worried about what you have in your checking account and saving for your future?
Absolutely. And so you talk a lot, and I appreciate that, because it's important, because what you're talking about is a lot of collaboration in your community. What I thought was interesting, Sean, was that you talked about housing, but you talked about the intersections of housing. You talked about education. You talked about workforce. You talked about healthcare, and why that is important, and why housing, particularly public housing authorities and community development agencies, we are important and vital in our communities as it pertains to that in terms of the investment, correct?
Exactly. And once you can educate outside of that realm, bankers, when they understand, Greenville, South Carolina put what I believe was the world's biggest Boeing plant in. They did not plan at the time for the housing they needed. So Blue Oak was coming to Tennessee. They're learning from that. They're aiming tax credit properties towards that area. We need to learn that in every community, that if you build it, they may not be able to come if they don't have housing to come.
That's right.
So we got, and that's also inclusive of schools, of hospitals. We got to make sure as we're building and we're developing communities in a thoughtful manner, and that it's not coming from Sean. The community needs to tell me where this needs to go. So we want to make sure our customers, and I don't like to use the word residents as much as customers, because the customer's right. When we got to drive this train, as you know, I talk about trains a lot growing up in a railroad family. We got to have this train going in the direction that our communities want, not that necessarily the housing authority wants. So we're always cognizant of thoughtfulness, of location, and services. Like I said, our Ready by 6 network, it encompasses the mental health professionals, the educators, who's providing the schools, the hospitals. It has to be a total community effort. The Imagination Library. So we're everything we do, Parks and Rec. We got to have everybody involved with this. Because every segment's really, really important.
Absolutely. So Sean, you've given us your background in terms of informers, your work, where you come from. We have just a couple more questions here. But the one thing that I left out on purpose, as we wrap this up with a couple more questions, is Sean is also running for the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, which is NARO, our trade organization, if you will, the largest housing trade organization, the most diverse. But Sean has also been involved in a lot of associations. He's involved with the Southeast Regional Council, which is a regional council division, if you will, of NARO, the largest in the association, I believe, both from a membership and also state perspective. But you've been involved with numerous local, state, and regional committees. In 2017, you was recognized as NARO's Emerging Leader Award, the national award. But this is what I found interesting. You're also in 2019 inducted into Kentucky Housing Authority Hall of Fame. That says a lot about who you are. And you're also a NARO fellow. So Sean, in just two or 3 minutes, if you could please talk to us about why run for president, a senior vice president of the largest association in the country.
Well, first of all, NARO and the organizations have given to me more than I can ever give back to them. So I grew up in a family that gave. You give first, you ask for something much later. So I want to give back to the national organizations, and I feel my experience is helpful there. But it's also, I learned so much from people like you, George, and from Patricia, the current president, and Sonny and Steve Merritt and Carl Ritchie, that I can take back to my community and redevelop what we're doing here and build community. So I look at it as a give and take. This puts me in the room when decisions are being made that I can advocate for our community. And I think that's really important, that we have all voices, whether it's, East Tennessee or Indianapolis or Fort Wayne or California. We got to have all the voices in the room so that we're not doing cookie cutter outcomes that fit some communities and not others. So I think it's really important that we collaborate and coalesce around each other. Right now, I truly believe we're in an area where we have major obstacles and opportunities. I always say when we have an obstacle, you have an opportunity. We can see a funding crunch coming. So let's position ourselves so that funding crunch isn't necessarily going to be as difficult as it is, and fight like hell to stop it. So I know you're a big thinker. You think on big scale, and that's what we need to do. We're at a point now where we can make social outcomes for this country that are positive, that our kids, we have families paying for school lunch in this country. That makes no sense. We're educating these kids. We're telling them you have to be there, but we're not going to feed you, possibly. Right. So yeah. we got to look at that's housing. That is a housing issue as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, all issues are housing, but all issues are local. So we need to have everyone come together and talk this through. That doesn't mean that our ideas are right. That doesn't mean your ideas are right. It doesn't. We're all probably right, but
absolutely,
for our localities. But we got to find a way to make sure that we have positive outcomes. And I truly think that's what NARO's been doing for the last few years. We're advocating in areas that we haven't in the past that we needed to be, and I want to continue that. And to be frank with you, I want to be a part of it. It's just fun. It's in your blood, and I think that we need more individuals to step up and make a difference. So
I think you made the case, John.
Yeah.
No, and really, I like what you said, because you're really talking about being inclusive and representation and being at the table and not on the menu. So I definitely appreciate that. Sean, you and I can talk all day, and I'm going to bring you back because next time we talk, I want you to talk more about your family. In fact, in this last question, because I'm going to have some fun here, okay. I want you to, first of all, give a shout out to your wife, because I know how much you love your wife and your son. Give them a shout out right quick.
Yeah, I couldn't do the things I do for people if it wasn't for my wife, Lori. My son's becoming the man he is because of her, much more than because of me. She's done such a fantastic job of raising him. My son's a junior at East Tennessee State, majoring in anthropology. And the amazing thing is I learned more from them than I could ever bestow on them. The faith of my wife is the bedrock of our family. So I appreciate her for that. Everything she does, taking care of the home, allows me to do these things like when I'm talking to you. My son, it's amazing, this generation. We have to engage these kids and make sure they're involved. He turns me on to books, whether it's Isabel Wilkinson or whoever it is that I'm here at work. I don't have necessarily take the time to educate myself on things. These kids take the time. They're involved. They're social media experts, and I've learned more from him than over the last 3 years than I probably have from anybody, because he's engaging, he's smart, he's insightful, and his morals and character are better than what a lot of our older people are that have become jaded. So right. I use them as a sounding background. My mother's here as well. I don't want to leave her out. My dad, who's no longer with us, but family, faith, and community are what I've tried to base everything on. And without my family, I wouldn't be here doing this. And I know you feel the exact same way. I follow you on social media, and I see you with your kids on game night. And that stuff is so important, because, we want to leave them a better world than what we got. And I worry truly that we're not doing that.
Absolutely, man. And listen, I appreciate you and your family as well. I'm going to have some fun with this last question as we close out in 2 minutes. I happen to know that Sean is a music collector. He likes the wax. He likes to hear that, put that little penny on the needle there. And he's also has been, not as much anymore, but he's a big time bourbon guy. So we got people out there that listen to music. We got people out there that like to collect and trying to figure out this bourbon thing. So in the last portion here, I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to give folks your top 3 bourbons that you would recommend they start in terms of collecting. And then what makes a good bourbon? I want you to tell me that, because that's the thing. And then the last thing is your top 3 albums of all time, all genres, or whatever. That's the tough one. Okay, so I'll make that one last. So the first one is top 3 bourbons and what makes a good bourbon.
Okay. First of all, I haven't had a bourbon in 9 months, so it's great that you asked that. But my top 3 bourbons, probably Collector's Pappy Van Winkle. It's hard to, anything I'm going to name here is hard to get. Okay. Weller, the Weller 12-year is a fantastic bourbon. So anything off the Weller line, the Pappy line, but I'm a traditionalist. I just wanted Buffalo Trace. That's an easy one. It's on the shelves. And they're all weeded bourbons. But what makes a great bourbon is that it has to be from Kentucky. If it's not from Kentucky, Tennessee, I live in Tennessee, but it's got to be from Kentucky, and it's got to be weeded, and it's just got to be smooth. So, but it's whatever you like. So.
Absolutely. Listen, this guy has a lot of knowledge about bourbon. I learned a lot when we were in Kentucky. So last question is top 3 albums of all time.
Number 1, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Okay. That album has to crackle. If you put it on and it's not crackling, it's just it's not going to work. So secondly, and it's not really a commercial album, but Sly and the Stones' greatest hits, Sly and the Family Stone's greatest hits. Every song on that is wonderful to listen to and uplifting. So those would be my top 2. My third one is probably the Byrds' Sweethearts of the Rodeo, commercial failure, but it was the first album that really, really did a good job, in my opinion, of fusing that classic rock sound with country. So I would go with Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, Sly and the Family Stone's greatest hits, and the Byrds' Sweethearts of the Rodeo. So Google those, and all 3 of them need the crackle.
That's my man right there, Sean Gilbert, folks. Listen, I ended with that because I wanted you to understand who this guy is. I've learned from him. I'm inspired by him. He is a fine leader, but you can see he also likes to have fun as well. And you should follow. Sean, where can they see you and follow you on social media?
Twitter, I think my handle is Hokey Sean. I went to Virginia Tech, so you see a lot of hokey things. I don't do much Instagram, but you can do that. But Facebook, just look for me on Facebook and add me. And I try to put fun things on. I try to put things on that are inspirational. That we all want to. I truly believe a smile is the best thing you can give somebody every day. So I try, whether it's at work or wherever, we all have hard jobs. We're all striving to make our communities better. But sometimes when a person walks in and they've had a rough day, we work in housing authorities. A lot of our people have had rough, give them a smile. That might be all we can give them, but usually they'll take it, and it can diffuse a lot of situations.
Good. So Sean, thank you again for joining us. I'm going to be closing here, but before I close out, Sean, I think that it's important that you and I both are sitting here on the screen today. Folks are going to be receiving this at a time. They're going to be listening to this at a time where they've recently heard about the shootings in Memphis. I know that you do a lot of work, in Nashville. I know you do a lot of work in Tennessee. On behalf of myself and Sean, both of us we consider ourselves servant leaders. We want to send our prayers and condolences to the family, but also to the community as well, as you're going through this loss. We can't imagine what you're going through. And I think much of this interview, you heard us talk about how much we need to do to better our communities for our children. So on behalf of us, we send our condolences and prayers to the family. Sean, again, thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate you, and I appreciate our friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And make sure to follow George on social media. He puts out a lot of great content, and I look forward to seeing you over the next few weeks on the road, George.
All right. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us. I hope that you learned, inspired, motivated to do something in your local community. We talk to people from all types of backgrounds. There's different ways to develop and grow communities. We like to talk, and we also like to have fun as well. So getting you inside some of these leaders that are in communities, and again, being inspirational and motivational, maybe, and help you gather some ideas on how you can change your community as well. So thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Real Talk with George Guy. Thank you. Make it a great one.